All right, good morning, everyone. It is 10 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I know a few people will probably still be joining, but wanted to be mindful of everyone's time and go ahead and get started on the presentation. So I'm not going to jump on camera because it seems a little unnecessary, but my name is Ryan Collins. I'm the Short Range Planning Manager for Campo, and I'm administering the project call. And I want to thank everyone for taking the time this morning to join this webinar. So this one is the first kind of the kicking off webinar to go through the 2028 to 2031 call for projects process. If you've been through this process before or read the materials, this is really going to just provide a high level kind of overview of the process itself. And so I'm just going to talk about the some key aspects of the call for projects process. We'll jump into the federal funding that is available. I'll go through the federal programs and the eligibilities for those programs, and then talk about the federal funding process itself. And then I'll do a quick overview of the actual evaluation process that Campo administers for the selection process. And then I'll go through the resources and then jump into the application and do a quick tour of the application. So I do have an hour and a half scheduled for this. I don't think the presentation will take more than 30 minutes, but I will stop in these key sections. Everyone is muted by default, but if you have any questions, I'll pause at the end of a section so you can raise your hand, and then I'll just unmute your mic and you can answer your question. A couple of other things is that we are recording this webinar, so it will be available on the website after this meeting, along with this presentation that I'm providing here. So talking about the kind of the project call administration. So the webpage where you registered in the funding opportunities webpage is going to host all of the project call information. So anything that's presented here today will be posted on that webpage. So just make sure you bookmark that page. Check back regularly. We will be updating it with additional reference materials, the webinar recordings, the links for the open office hours and registration. And if we have any changes or announcements to make, that's where it's going to be posted. Along with we do have actually four webinars that we're going to be conducting during this project call process. We also have open office hours. And so this is essentially, these are meeting links, Teams meetings, where myself and Christine and other staff will be available. You can call in if you have any questions. It's just a dedicated time for you to access staff and ask questions. Along with that, there is a dedicated funding at campotexas.org email. So any questions or comments or any concerns you have, please email this address. This is a dedicated email for the project call. And it's really important, and it is prioritized. I manage that inbox, but it is the best way to contact us during the project call process. And then any questions that we have, again, on the webpage, we'll have an FAQ. So hopefully, we made some major updates to the materials and the reference sources for this project call. But if you have any questions or any consistent questions that we'll have will be addressed in an FAQ document that we will update regularly. I think last project call, we posted a new one every single week based on the questions that we would receive that week. And then with the due date being in the end of January, we'll definitely continue to post through January 7th. We'll try to update it continually after that as time allows, but I know at crunch time, we typically get flooded towards the end of the project call process. So just keep that in mind. So the application process, obviously today we're here for the first information session to really kind of just give you a guided tour of the process. We're going to do another webinar next week and the week after that on the October 28th and November 5th. Those are going to be deep dives into the two components of the project selection process. And so next week we'll focus entirely on project readiness. That one will probably last the entire hour and a half. That's a very detailed part of the process. And then of course benefit evaluation is too, but I think critically, I think the project readiness is probably the most critical of the two of those. And then the benefit evaluation process We'll go through each of the different categories that we have and really help you understand how we measure benefits. And so you can look at your own products and determine what's best to submit. And again, the office hours will be scheduled on these dates. We may add some more. I know there's only 4. I'll probably add some more in January, just depending on the need there. And then we'll do a final webinar on January 14th. That's about the time everybody tends to start their applications. And so I just want to make sure that as we close in on the last 2 weeks of this process, that we have kind of a last opportunity to get everybody together, to get questions answered so that you can get your submittals wrapped up. And then the review process in the spring, once everything, so applications, obviously I missed the big piece of this, January 30th, 2026 at 5 p.m. Central, that is when applications are due. Your application portal will shut off at that time, so please make sure that your submittals are in before then. So after January 30th, we'll start the evaluation process, which begins with the eligibility and readiness assessment screening. That'll typically last through April, and then once all the projects that are considered ready will then move into the benefit evaluation process, where we actually score projects and rank them according to their scores and provide that recommendation to the Technical Advisory Committee and the Policy Board. And we are scheduled to take this action to the Policy Board on June 8th, 2026. I do expect that's going to be a pretty tight schedule. It just depends on how many applications we have to review, how complex those projects are going to be. And so, the evaluation process will dictate if we can make that schedule. So we will update everyone after January 30th when we know what we're looking at as far as review schedule goes. And if we have to adjust that, we may move that action item until August or September of that year. It doesn't really change much on the administrative aspects of you receiving the funds if you get selected. So just wanted to point that out, but we'll definitely let everyone know if you've submitted. We'll send out that updated schedule within a week of the January 30th deadline. So I want to talk a little bit about the process, and these next 2 slides are, to me, while it's early in the presentation and people are paying attention, I wanted to make sure we kind of took a step back. And I want to kind of frame up this project called process, because I think this will really help you understand where we're coming from as an organization and what we prioritize as in the region, essentially. And so the project call process is really designed to emphasize several key aspects that it really balances the diverse regional needs. We are a very diverse region, and we wanted to make sure that this process was equitable to the entire region, regardless of where you're sitting and what your needs are, that it's balanced in a way that everyone can compete and have an opportunity to receive funding through this. It also, we emphasize transparency. I think that's one of the things that's entirely critical. There's no black box. You know what you're going to score, essentially, and as you go through the process, you can self-score. You can see what we have the readiness checklists. Everything is out there, and so there's no black box. I'm not making the decision. I'm just administering the process, and the results are what they are. So, and that's a key part of this, I think, is that transparency. It is a performance-based evaluation. That's a federal requirement, but it's also just kind of a best practice, is that this is really about the projects that make the best impact on the region more than anything else. And then we look at that data, that qualitative and quantitative data, to assess the performance of any given project and the impacts on the region. And I think it also just promotes stewardship. This is really about accountability. On our end, when we fund projects, we're talking millions and millions of federal dollars, public dollars, your tax dollars, my tax dollars. And I think this really promotes stewardship and holds both us as staff and an organization accountable, but you as sponsors who administer these products, it really helps hold everyone accountable. So this is kind of the heart of the presentation to me. I'll go through all the technical stuff, but everyone on this call, you're either a consultant or you work directly for one of the local governments that's planning on submitting. And so I wanted to as we go through this process and through the next slides, I wanted to kind of stop and talk about some considerations for you as sponsors. What I think you should be thinking about as you approach this process to kind of help you select which projects are appropriate to submit, which ones will be competitive, and which ones will be ready. I think this is kind of a step back slide for me, I think. And recommendations I would have as you decide what you want to submit, I would keep these key considerations in mind. And one is, as I mentioned earlier, focus on the region. There are a lot of local priorities that aren't necessarily regional. I think focus on those local priorities that you have that are regionally significant and that meet the policy board's priorities that are outlined in the 2050 plan and distilled into the project selection process. We look at projects, the ones that are regional and regionally significant will, rise to the top when it comes to the benefit evaluation. That's what it's designed for. And oftentimes the highest local priority doesn't necessarily mean it's a regional project. And so I think those are things you just kind of need to balance as you're looking at your portfolio of projects to consider submitting. Focus on the ones that really make an impact on a region-wide basis. And I would also encourage you to know the odds. So we don't know how many projects are going to be submitted and what the funding requests are and how competitive this process is going to be. But based on conversations I'm have had with local sponsors and I'm getting an idea of what's coming down through this process. And because funds are limited, I mean, we're talking, and I'll talk about how much we have, but funds are limited. So it's likely that most projects are not going to be selected for funding. I'm expecting about triple the amount of funding requests and funding we have available. We'll know when we get there, but I think that's one thing to consider. If you're planning on taking the shotgun approach, that's entirely up to you. But I would recommend a more targeted approach just to know that funds are limited and the more projects you submit, it's likely that most of them are not going to get selected. So I just want everyone to be realistic about that. Understand federalization. I think this is a key point. When you're looking at what projects to submit, consider the significant impacts of federalizing a project. Federal funding is not always appropriate for every single project. It has a lot of requirements that kick in. It is money, it is funding, but it's not all funding is created equal. So I would encourage you to understand the federal process and how that will impact your project and whether it's worthwhile to do that. And then I would also, be realistic about what that project will take to complete the development process and the benefits that it'll provide. It's a competitive process, and oftentimes people will, look at their projects with rose-colored glasses. I would say just be realistic about it. That it's, this process will suss out what your project actually is. And so I would just ask you to be very realistic about what's appropriate to submit and what your project really is. And then provide evidence. This is something that we'll talk a lot about in the next two webinars, but applications have to be defensible. So as you're providing, putting together your applications, just make sure that you're always providing clear justification, methodology, assumptions. Because as reviewers, we do question everything that's in the application and we do verify everything that's in there. So if you say a product does, XYZ, we're going to check and make sure that you are backing that up if it's not inherently obvious that the project provides that benefit. And then again, this process, talking about stewardship again, it's really about accountability. And again, we're distributing hundreds of millions of public dollars. So when you're submitting a request and putting together your application, to me, it's, you're asking for so much money. Give your application the reverence it deserves and this process the reverence it deserves, because you're not doing anyone any favors by just, not putting in the effort in your application. So I think that's just something to think about. I mean, if you're requesting $100 million, I mean, if it were your own money, I think you would want somebody to put in the effort. So that's just kind of something I've noticed that, I know with the IIJA and a lot of federal programs, you can put in a one-page application and get $100 million. That's not what this process is and not how it's going to be administered. So I would just keep that in mind. I think it's the amount of funding should be reflected on the amount of effort that you put into your application. And I think that will just help you be competitive in this process and just kind of philosophical point of view that I wanted to bring up. So these are just considerations for you as sponsors to think about as you go through the process. Obviously, I don't know what situation you're in or what projects you're looking at. You can submit whatever is eligible, and we will give it, the same evaluation we'll give everyone. But it's just, I think it would be beneficial for everyone involved if you took a focused approach on your project submittals. So let's jump into the federal funding process. If anybody has any questions, let me know. I'm looking for raised hands and don't see any, but just let me know if you have any questions. So let's talk about federal funding in general. So federal funding, is authorized by Congress, and the most recent Infrastructure and Investments in Jobs Act, the IIJA, is the current authorization that this funding is going to be distributed through. And so that includes all of the annual apportionments, including our Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, the Transportation Alternative Set-Aside Program, and the Carbon Reduction Program. These funds are obligated. Obligation is when the funding is formally committed to specific projects, and this happens after you've developed your AFA with the TxDOT Austin District. So this is not really a necessary slide for y'all to understand, really, but I did want to talk about the TIP in the federal funding process. So the first step, obviously, is the selection and award, depending on the program. We, as an MPO, are responsible for 3 programs directly, which are the ones we're going to be talking about today. At that point, they are included in the TIP, and then we submit it to the STIP. And then at that point, once it's in the STIP, the federal agency, FHWA in this case, will go in and directly approve the projects that have been selected through this process. And that really kind of kicks off the administrative process on the TxDOT side. So funding administration, so all funds that are awarded through these are implemented directly by the local sponsor under the oversight and administration of the Texas Department of Transportation. So the MPO, these are, our funding programs, but they are administered by TxDOT. You will be working with TxDOT through the duration of your project, and they manage all of the entire process. So basically, they are our bank in this case. So we, select a project, they'll handle everything else. And so even though we work with them very closely and monitor all of these projects as well, but you will be working directly with the Texas Department of Transportation, specifically the Austin District and the area offices within the district on your projects. And so this is, in addition, there's a 20% match for all of these funding programs, all 3 of them. There's also a direct state cost fee that is due to TxDOT at the time of AFA execution. This is for the administrative costs of managing the project on the TxDOT side. This is a negotiated fee that you have to pay when you execute that AFA. It basically pays for the staff time that TxDOT has to provide for management of the projects. This includes all of the design reviews, all of the billing administration fees, and then also like site visits and things like that, like all of the monitoring of construction projects. So it's a lot of resources that TxDOT has to use to manage a project, and so that's what that fee is for. It is, you make a deposit at the beginning of it, and at the end of the project, when you close out, if it's if they spent less than the amount that was billed at the beginning, you'll get a reimbursement or a check back, a refund essentially for that cost. I do want to point out that no activities are eligible for reimbursement until the advanced funding agreement is executed between the local sponsor and TxDOT, and that notice to proceed has been issued. I think this just, and looking at the left-hand side, the board does their selection and award. At that point, it's going to go into the TIP, which takes about 6 months. And you also start the AFA execution process. That can take 6 months to a year, depending on the type of project and all the back and forth. NEPA clearance, it can take anywhere between 6 months and 3 years, depending on if it's a major project or if it's a categorical exclusion. And at that point, the funding is obligated and you can go to letting or begin the project. So just wanted to point that out, that as you build your schedules, and we'll talk more about this in the next webinar, but just know that you can't start spending funding until the AFA is executed, and that takes a little bit. And then again, projects that are selected for funding have to adhere to the policy board's policy on continual project progress. This is something that actually Christine is going to be presenting on a technical advisory committee, but we monitor projects and we have to make sure that once projects are selected for funding, that they're continually making progress through the implementation phase. So just a few things to point out. So I think the other thing is that it is a reimbursement program. I probably should have started with this. You do not receive a check at funding selection. This is a reimbursement program. No funding is provided up front. Sponsors are responsible for incurring those costs and contributing a minimum of 20% to the total project cost. And the way that looks at, is that if it's a construction project, the local government incurs those expenses on a regular basis. They submit those invoices to TxDOT on a regular basis, and those are reimbursed at a rate of 80% through the duration of the project. Hey, Tom, I see you have a question. Let me, yeah. You should be able to unmute now, Tom.
Gotcha. Thanks. Hey, good morning.
Hey, morning.
Yeah, Tom Goodall with Cedar Park. Just curious if you could elaborate on the direct state cost that gets negotiated after the award. Is that something that jurisdictions can incorporate a percentage into the application, or is that discouraged? That's just something the local has to account for on its own, or can that be part of the federal funding?
It can be part of the federal funding. That's a really good question. So you can include the direct state costs in your funding request. And, obviously the federal funding will cover 80% of the direct state costs. And so it is a negotiated fee. And one thing, and I'll talk about the cost estimates and funding requests in the next webinar in more detail, but you can include that. And what was I going to say? That we're going to encourage that if you do include it, an average 15% rate is probably a good number to stick with. So 15% of the total project cost, and you can include that. If it ends up being less, great. If we don't see it being more than that, but that's something we'll work with TxDOT on as we look at the projects, and they're going to help in the review process. I wanted to mention that TxDOT will also help in the review process and readiness, and we'll see if we can get actual rates at that point. But yeah, so hopefully that answers that. No, kind of.
Yeah, thank you.
That, yeah. So yes, one, you can include it in your funding request, and two, we'll use an average rate of 15%. And if that changes, we'll definitely know during the recommendation process. So we'll make sure that we get that rate correct when we make the recommendation.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks. Paige, I see you have a question.
Hi, just clarifying, when you say total project cost, do you mean the phase you're requesting for?
Yes.
Like if you're requesting for construction and that's the total construction costs, and then you can add that state cost as like 15% of the construction cost?
Yes, yeah, 15% of the I would say the total scope cost, I guess, is a better way to say that instead of total project cost. Because because you'll be requesting a specific phase. It's just the total cost of that phase. So that's a good question.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks. Okay, so I'm going to move into the programs that we are going to be distributing through this project call. So this is a funding program summary, and I'm going to I have all of the eligibilities in this presentation. I'm not going to go through all of them because we would be here forever. I do want to kind of just give a high level review of the eligibilities. And so the majority of the funding is the Surface Transportation Block Grant funding. And I feel like I skipped a slide. Hang on. I must have. Anyway, sorry. Oh, it's actually right after this one. Just kidding. So Surface Transportation Block Grant funding is the majority of the funding in this project call. It is the most flexible federal funding program. Essentially, anything that is related to surface transportation is likely eligible through this program. So that the majority of it is typically, highway construction, bridge repairs. You can do transit projects, pedestrian infrastructure, and ITS. Basically anything that is related to surface transportation is eligible under Surface Transportation Block Grant funding. And then we have two specialized programs, Transportation Alternative Set Aside Program, which is a much smaller set aside out of the SCBG program, and that provides funding specifically for smaller scale transportation projects such as pedestrian and bicycle facilities, safe routes to school projects, and other community improvements. And then there's also the Carbon Reduction Program. This provides funding for projects that reduce transportation emissions, surface transportation emissions, including all TASA eligible activities, includes ITS, TDM, and other measures. I will say that anything that is eligible under carbon reduction and TASA is also eligible under the Surface Transportation Block Grant funding. So that's kind of the umbrella eligibility program in my mind. So let's talk about the funding that is available. So these are projected amounts from fiscal years 28 through 31 for Surface Transportation Block Grant funding. We do have TASA funding and CRP funding that's available in fiscal year 27. We had some rollover from the previous call, so it is available a little bit earlier. And so the projected amounts for STBG is close to $330 million, $40 million in TASA funding, and then $13 million in carbon reduction funding. So this is a funding forecast based on our current apportionments and forecasts out in future fiscal years. Obviously, all of this is predicated on congressional action, but we are using our current, we're forecasting out what we currently receive in an annual apportionment out through those years. And so this is future funding. These amounts may change. They are projected, but we feel confident that these amounts are pretty close to what we have available because they will get programmed, and obviously the apportionments won't hit our bank account until that particular fiscal year, and all depend on congressional action. So I just want to point that out. That's always something to be considered. The recommendation itself will be influenced by the number of ready projects schedules and then the funding requests. And so we'll manage those schedules when we can program projects, when your projects are ready, and where we can program them in the schedule. STBG funding is available. The earliest it's available is fiscal year 2028, which starts on October 1st, 2027. TASA and CRP funding is available in fiscal year 27, which starts on October 1st, 2026, which is about the time we'll be making the project, a few months after we make the project selection through this project call. I do want to point out, and I think the funding availability is something you need to consider as you go through your schedule, and I'll talk about this next week. But the post-award process timeline will limit our ability to program TASA and CRP funding in fiscal year 27, just because it takes time to develop that AFA and get that tip approval. So even though the funding is available in 27, it's going to be a tight schedule to get that funding released within that fiscal year. So just something to consider. I'll talk more about that when we talk about schedules in the readiness process, but I just wanted to point that out. So this is, I'm about to just do a very high level review of eligible activities that you can submit. It's all based on what is in this Guide to Federal Aid Program and Projects with this very old looking cover. So this is the official guide that the Federal Highway Administration puts out that summarizes all of the eligible activities for each program. So all three programs that I'm about to review, actually carbon reduction is not included in here yet. So they are in the middle of updating this for the IIJA. That has been under review for the past year. I think it'll be a while before the new one is updated, but I want to point out that this is if you have any questions about what's eligible, go to this resource and read the particular programs that are in it. It has all of the references you need in there. All of the information is kind of compiled into one spot. This is actually what Federal Highways staff use when they question eligibility on a project. And so we do the same thing, actually. So we'll check and read this document before we do anything else. So this is the official resource. Obviously, it just compiles everything that's in the US code because the eligibilities are listed there, and that's where all this comes from. But it's all distilled into this one spot. So please take the opportunity to read this if you have any questions about your eligibility. So now I'm going to go into the Surface Transportation Block Grant funding. So eligible sponsors, state government, local government, a regional transportation authority, transit agency, other government agency, nonprofit organizations are eligible. There's an asterisk by that because we have the board approved a new requirement that nonprofits must partner with a local government agency. And then other entities that have legal oversight over transportation are also eligible. And again, this is just a summary of what the Surface Transportation Block Grant program is. One thing that's important is the location of the projects. So there are location requirements for the majority of the eligible activities in STBG. So it has to be anything that is a minor collector in an urbanized area or above. So major collectors, minor arterials, principal arterials, freeways, interstates are eligible for STBG funding. A good resource for this is the statewide planning map that TxDOT manages. It's linked in your resources material. If you don't know your functional classification, please review the statewide planning map to determine your functional classification. I do want to point out that off-system locations are eligible for specific activities. I believe bridge replacement is one of them, where you can replace bridges regardless if they are on a function classified roadway, but it's just something to consider as you go through this process, that we have to look at the functional classification. That's part of your application. You'll let us know what the functional classification is of the current facility and the anticipated functional class after the project is completed. So this is the resource to go for that if you have any questions on that. So let me go into the actual eligibilities. There are 6 slides that are this dense, and so I'm not going to go through everything, but I want to just point out that, basically anything that is surface transportation related is eligible. So roadway projects, transit projects, ITS infrastructure, truck parking facilities, board infrastructure projects, which won't have any meaning here, operational improvements, environmental measures, and trails, planning, design, construction, anything you can. It's hard pressed to find something that isn't eligible under STBG. So I'm not going to go through all of these. I think it's probably good as you go as this is posted online to go through this, and please just check the actual USC references. But if you have any questions as you go through these eligibilities, please let me know. And then there have been some newly added activities from the IIJA. So since the last project call, there's some new additions that probably worth pointing out. So a lot of it's related to EV infrastructure. You can actually Hyperloop and maglev are one of the eligible activities now. So I would encourage you to go through these new eligibilities as well. So it really expands on the existing eligibilities a little bit more. And then TASA, again, the same eligibilities as I had mentioned earlier. These are more focused, and the way I would think about TASA is anything that doesn't expand capacity for single occupancy vehicles. So the next 2 programs, TASA and carbon reduction, kind of operate under that assumption. So that's just kind of the best way to think about it. And so, again, it's related to, off-road trail facilities, pedestrian and bike facilities, and things of that nature. So I'm going to skip through a lot of these, but if you have any specific questions, I can go back to a specific slide. Otherwise, I'll be here reading all day these eligibilities. So again, I just want to orient you to who's eligible and then where the eligibility list is. And so please review that as you consider which projects to submit. One thing on CRP eligibility I want to point out, this is a new program. It has a little bit of a different approval process. So it does have to support the adopted strategies in TxDOT's carbon reduction strategy. That's a statewide strategy document. And any projects that are being submitted for consideration for CRP funding have to meet those strategies. They do have to demonstrate direct reduction in emissions. There's a separate approval process just for CRP projects where they are submitted to FHWA ahead of time through a monthly eligibility review. So they send a spreadsheet over every month, and FHWA reviews the eligibilities on those projects. They don't do this for any other program, I think, because this is so new, and they're kind of figuring out what, the nuances of the program that they're doing this extra process in there. So just wanted to point that out. And yeah, so Transportation development credits. I want to talk about this program a little bit more in depth. So those are talked about the three eligible programs that we are administering funding for. Transportation development credits is a federal program that we also administer, and it's a little bit different and it's not funding. So I wanted to just take a few slides to talk about transportation development credits. So they are a federal finance program that we administer that waives the local match requirements on a federally funded project. So that 20% local share, it allows you essentially to take that local share and spend it on another non-federal project, transportation project in the region. What that does is that, and then, you don't have a local match on a project in there. So one thing to point out though, it's not cash and it doesn't provide additional funding for a project. All it does is it changes your reimbursement rate, not the actual total reimbursement amount at the end of the day. And they don't remove the requirement of sponsors to have that local match. So oftentimes people consider TDCs, oh, I don't have to have the local match, I've got TDCs. You still have to have that local match. You're just spending it somewhere else in the region on a similar transportation project. So I wanted to point that out. So the actual TDC process and how it relates to this call for projects. So sponsors can apply for TDCs for their call for projects submittal. You'll be asked to indicate that you are seeking submittals in the actual application itself, but you'll have to complete a separate TDC application by the call for projects deadline. So if you're submitting an application and you want TDCs to be considered for your project, you need to submit a separate application by the same deadline as the call for projects deadline. So if you're applying for TDCs, you'll have a second evaluation of the project completed to determine your adjusted score, rank, and funding impacts. One thing I want to point out is that TDCs are not guaranteed. So sponsors, you have to prepare your project call application under the assumption that TDCs will not be awarded to ensure that you're meeting all of the funding requirements for the project you are submitting. Again, they're not guaranteed. It's a completely separate process from the call for projects process that'll run concurrently. And I'll talk about those impacts in the next couple of slides, but I just wanted to point that out. It's a completely separate process, so just treat it like that. So let's talk about the regional impacts. And so talking about TDCs, they can really benefit a region in specific situations. They provide flexibility and they help us spend down the apportioned federal funding we have in a timely manner because, it basically helps us maximize our funding utilization rate. But it's only beneficial when a region has fewer projects and regional needs than it has funding available. And I'll talk about that in a second because basically you have to we have to spend more federal funding on a particular project that has TDCs on it. So how we adjust for the loss of local match on a project is if you request TDCs, what we'll do, we have to adjust your federal funding request to cover the entire scope. As you can see on this chart here, we'll have to adjust the federal share up. So this is $1 million project example. Normally, we would award $800,000. The local government would be providing $200,000 as the local match, and you've covered your entire $1 million project scope. When you apply TDCs to a project, you no longer have that local match. And so what we do and why it has to run concurrent with the call for projects process is that we will adjust your federal funding award up to $1 million in this example to cover the loss of that local match. So that means we are spending more money on an individual project than we would if you were providing the local match on that project. And so in that way, if there are more projects available than there is federal funding, as I expect to happen in this project call, TDCs can have a significant negative impact and limit funding availability to other projects because we're effectively spending more per project than we would if we didn't have TDCs involved. And so if you are requesting TDCs and it requires that adjustment of the federal award to cover that cost, again, it concentrates that funding on fewer projects. And I'll show you an example of this. So the TDC recommendation and the project call, we'll have in this example here, we have 4 projects with a federal award and a local match to cover the total project cost of $21 million. If everyone is requesting TDCs, we won't have enough funding because we have to adjust the federal award up to $21 million to cover the full project cost. We won't have enough funding to fund all 4 projects. In the first scenario, without TDCs, we have enough funding to distribute between 4 projects. With TDCs, it'll concentrate the federal funding again, and we will be able to fund fewer projects. So it really limits the distribution of funding in the region. So that's just something to consider. And it really impacts the cutoff line. It also negatively impacts the benefit evaluation score and cost benefit analysis of a project due to the higher commitment of federal funding required. So this will impact, so if you're requesting TDCs, the cost benefit is based on how much federal funding we have to put on a project. So if we have to put more federal funding on a project, your cost benefit analysis ratio is going to be impacted negatively. Your project will score less with TDCs than it would without. So I just wanted to point that out. And so the final recommendation, if we have TDCs that are requested through this project call, we're going to be providing 2 scenarios to the policy board. One with the standard awards without TDCs, and then one with transportation development credit requests included. And so they can see those impacts and they can make a decision on which one they want to move forward with. I'm going to stop there. Are there any questions about that? Hey, Tom.
Hey, thanks for the chance again. I'm wrapping my head around TDCs for years. I've always wondered why we have so many TDCs, millions and millions, and yet we really don't have opportunities to use them. Because if nobody spent any local share dollars on applications in this call for projects, and many call for projects coming, it would still be our lifetime before those TDCs would be used up, right? I mean, why do we have so many and then we really don't use them?
Yeah, we have close to 1 billion transportation development credits, and there's usually a credit per dollar conversion rate, is my understanding. I've never seen the actual conversion rate, but that's how we treat it, and at least our FHWA staff member treats it. But yeah, no, and that really kind of gets to that point where it's good if we had less projects than we have funding, then we should absolutely use TDCs, but it's almost always the case it's the opposite. We did a recent project call for 5310 funding earlier this year where we had a case where we didn't have enough projects to use the available federal funding. And so we encouraged TDC use in that case because it helped us spend down that money that would otherwise go back to DC and be unused. But in a case where, we've got triple the amount of demand, that means fewer sponsors are going to be getting funding if we apply TDCs to all of them. So it's a weird program, in my opinion. It's beneficial in very limited circumstances in my mind. And it's pretty common. Actually, I would say almost all of the other MPOs, there's 4 MPOs that receive TDCs. And they're all in the same situation where we have a very high balance of TDCs because the limited use of it. But yeah, no, that's a good point to bring up, Tom.
Thanks.
So.
Any risk of TDCs ever just going away? I mean, what wasn't the purpose to offset toll projects, or right?
Yeah, it's like when I don't see them going away. There's no expiration date on them, and it's in statute. So.
Okay. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks. So, and that's just something to consider. I will say again that it's like if a project's eligible for TDCs, there's a policy and eligibility requirements for the TDC application. It's a separate process. You are more than welcome to submit for TDCs if you think it's appropriate. I do want to just point out that, it does have those impacts, and we're going to demonstrate those impacts to the policy board, whether they're good or bad. It's really more of a political decision if they want to, if a project meets both the requirements of the call for projects process and the TDC process. That's really a board decision more than anything else. And we'll just be providing that analysis and that information to them. Yeah. See, Tony, I have a question. Let me allow Mike. There you go.
Yeah, I think I must just be misunderstanding here, because with the TDC, early on, you talked about you don't need the local match, but that you take that 20% local match and apply it to another smaller project in the region.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to understand, at the end of the day, the sponsor is still responsible for that 20%, whether it's for the local match for the specific project or to execute another project. So where's the benefit for the sponsor? Or is there?
Well, if you're already spending the funding on another project and you want to keep it up or like move your local funding to another project, it helps. I guess yeah, the local government is going to be spending that money regardless. But basically you can have a 100% federal project and not, it helps you distribute the funding, I guess, in the local jurisdiction more than anything
Gotcha.
else.
Okay.
So
Understood.
it's like if you have two projects, you 100% federalize one and you want to spend your local match and spend it on a different project, you can basically get two products for the same amount of funding that you have to have one way or the other. So the technical term for it is maintenance of effort. It's actually in the U.S. code. It's just called maintenance of effort. Is that a local sponsor is required to maintain the same level of investment in the transportation system regardless, and that's really what the TDC application process does. Is it looks at the project that has the federal funding on it, and then you have to demonstrate that you have a second project that's going to be implemented concurrently with that redistributed local funding. So
Thank you.
yeah, thanks. It's a weird program, and I'm more than happy to spend more time on that. But I would encourage, if you're curious about it, read the policy, look at the application, and you know, let me know if you have any questions about that. So thank you. So now that I've talked about the federal sources, I'm going to jump in. I'm probably talking a little bit more than I should, but taking more time than anyways. So I'm going to go through the process overview really quickly. So talking about the actual call for projects process. So now that we've talked about the federal funding programs, the available funding and the schedule, let's talk about the actual process that we go through to make a recommendation to the policy board. So this is a high-level summary here. Step 1, we determine that a project actually meets the federal funding program requirements. Step 2 is the readiness assessment. So we basically ensure that a project can complete all required milestones and be implemented as scheduled. Step 3 is the benefit evaluation, where we determine the regional value of a project and how well it meets the goals and objectives of the policy board. And then based on that benefit evaluation, we go into step 4 and we recommend projects based on the evaluation results and the ranks of the projects and funding availability. So let's talk about step 1, eligibility. So both project scopes and sponsors must meet the federal, state, and regional eligibility requirements. In addition to these eligibilities, project scopes must be submitted for the appropriate development phase. So you just need to be submitting for the next eligible phase in the development process. So phases that are eligible for consideration in this project call include planning, engineering and design, which is preliminary engineering through 100% PS&E, environmental clearance, which includes NEPA, and then obviously construction. And I'll talk about this more in the next webinar, but you can also combine certain elements of these phases together if it's appropriate with where your project is. But these are the 4 eligible phases for consideration. We do not fund right-of-way or utility relocation. Step 2 is readiness. Again, I'll talk a lot more about this next week, but readiness is really the core of the readiness process is really about risk and uncertainty and really kind of protecting the financial investments that the policy board makes on projects and ensuring that we're getting those regional benefits that are invested in. You know, I think it's always good to point out that investing in projects that are not appropriately developed have a lot of adverse negative effects for the region. This includes in the case of TASA and CRP funding, we can directly lose funding through appropriation lapses. So if we pick a project that is not ready and it does not make it to letting on time, TASA and CRP funding in particular expire. You have 4 years to put it on a project and get it obligated. If we don't meet that schedule, we lose that funding. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. There is now a new Texas Administrative Code rule where if we have more than 200% of our annual allocation and it's not being used by projects that we have selected, it can be redistributed to other areas of the state. But I think it's also important from a sponsor perspective. You know, you want your projects to be ready because of the rapid devaluation of the purchasing power of the funding that we put on a project. You want to make sure that inflation can have a lot of negative impacts, and that really results in higher cost burdens for local sponsors. One thing I want to point out is that the federal funding award is static. So what you get is what you're from the policy board is you know, what you're stuck with from a federal perspective. So if a project goes up in cost, you as a local government sponsor are responsible for those cost overruns. And so the longer a project sits and doesn't meet its schedule, the more expensive a project gets. And I think we all realize that, especially in the last few years, that's been a pretty challenging aspect of project development. So it's really important that we make sure that a project is ready to go for the phase that it's requesting. So that we can avoid these negative impacts. And again, it's also opportunity loss for other local sponsors. If we park funding on a project and is not ready to use that funding, that's money that you could be using if somebody else is sitting on that money. So that's just something to consider. It really creates an opportunity loss if we are funding projects that are not considered to be ready. And then two, I think the other part of readiness that's important is that it really provides us the necessary assurance that the project can be built exactly as it's proposed and evaluated in the project selection process. So we look at the benefits of a particular scope, and if that scope is not appropriately developed or changes throughout the process, then those benefits are no longer that we have evaluated are no longer valid. And so it really provides the foundation that this is, you know, the predicted benefits of this project, and we know we're going to get those benefits because this project has been developed appropriately and is able to move forward as it's been awarded. So step two, and this is what I'll do the deep dive on next week, is really the 13 areas of the project development process that the readiness evaluation looks at. So we've got these 13 aspects of the project that we look at individually to make sure that a project is considered ready. Projects that are considered ready then move into the benefit evaluation process. And then we have 7 categories of projects: roadway, ITS operations, transit, active transportation, transportation demand management, planning, and then others is kind of catch-all if your project does not meet any of the definitions under these project types, but is still eligible for some other aspect of surface of SCBG funding. You can apply under other. We do a planning factor evaluation, and then a cost benefit analysis of all the projects, with the exception of transportation planning, because we don't have a project to do a cost benefit analysis on typically until the planning process is complete. And this will be the focus of the webinar in 2 weeks. And then step 4 is the recommendation. We basically combine the results of all of the scores into a single ranked portfolio of projects, and then we essentially match the available funding in order of regional benefit rank. And so we just start at the top ranking projects and move our way down as funding is available and the project is eligible for that particular funding bucket. And if there's not enough funding to cover the request of a particular project, so we'll move into the next ranked project and so on. And as I mentioned earlier in the TDC process, if we get TDC submittals in this project call process, we will create a second funding recommendation scenario for the board to consider. This will have alternative ranks depending on the impacts of the TDC requests on individual projects, and it'll change the cutoff line if we have to adjust federal funding on particular projects up. So just want to keep that in mind. If that scenario happens, we're going to provide a second TDC scenario. So let's go through the resources. I'm about to close in on the hour, and I'm almost done with the presentation. So the guide to the selection for regional transportation projects, has all of the information that I've presented in this webinar. And I would, if you're intending on applying, I would take the opportunity to read through this document from start to finish. We've significantly expanded it for this project call based on the last project call, adding additional resources and whatnot. So it's a very comprehensive resource. So please take the time to go through this document if you intend on submitting. It has all the information on the federal funding programs. Again, it's got the project evaluation and selection process information, the readiness assessment information, project evaluation criteria, links to all sorts of resources, as well as the appendices, new appendices A through F. So updates we made from the last project call, we have updated sponsor eligibility requirements. I mentioned that the policy board made a change to nonprofit sponsors needing to partner with local governments. That's what that's related to. There's an entirely new section on TDCs. So based on those 4 slides, there's a much more in-depth section in the guide for TDCs. and also demonstrates how to calculate TDCs and the impacts it'll have on your projects. We've expanded the funding requirement information, as well as the readiness criteria guidance. Basically, the process itself has not changed, but we just added a lot more guidance in the document itself. We've also included the review checklist templates that we as staff will use on your project, so you know exactly what we're going to be looking at. I think that's particularly important for the review checklist for readiness. That is the exact checklist that we will be using as staff, so you can go ahead and do that checklist yourself on your own projects to see where it lands. You can also do that for your score. You can go through that checklist in your benefit evaluation and see how your project would potentially score. So this will help you kind of estimate where your project will land in the process. And then again, we added appendices A through F. So I did want to point out, or A through E, excuse me. Did want to point out the appendices in particular, because this really expands on the underlying principles that guide the project selection process. Really just, there's like particular areas that I thought really needed to be expanded on based on my experience with the last project call. Appendix A is really about calculating your funding request. The 80-20 match and understanding how to calculate that. There's some examples in there for calculating your funding request, and it also has an example for calculating a request if you're going to have TDC. So just want to point that out because I think there was some issues in the last call with how much the federal funding is going to be and how much the local match is going to be. So that's what that appendix is for. We have fundamentals of scoping and cost estimation in Appendix B, principles of the application review, and then also the checklist that I had mentioned. Appendix B and C are something I would encourage everyone to take the opportunity to read because it helps you approach your scoping process and your cost estimation process. And also helps. Appendix C is really about how we as reviewers are going to be looking at your projects, and so it's really intended to help you see your projects the way we're going to see your projects, and I hope that will help you prepare your applications accordingly. Resources, and these are all links in the document itself. There are federal resources, including the U.S. Code. The Guide to Federal Aid Program and Projects are the two that I would like to point out that you should visit if you get the chance or have any questions about eligibilities. Project development resources. Most of these are related to TxDOT's local government project procedures. I would read those, and there's also a federal aid essentials for local public agencies. These are the ones that I would absolutely recommend everyone to go take a look at. This, especially the TxDOT's local government project procedures materials. That's the process that will dictate your project after it's selected, and it's really important that you understand what you're getting into, especially as you develop your schedules. And understanding readiness is understanding what it's going to take to implement that project with federal funding. And this has that list and that process in there. So please take the opportunity to visit those resources. And then project evaluation resources. This is basically for benefit evaluation, some resources for you to help, demonstrate the benefits of your project. Again, the local government project resource manuals, I wanted to point those out again. They get their own slide because they're so important in my mind. I actually have a copy of the local government project management guide sitting on my desk. This is the A to Z guide on what it's going to take to administer your projects through this process. So at least skim that. This will help you understand as you develop your schedule where your project is, what you're going to have to do to get through the TxDOT LGPP process. So please take the time to read that, or at least skim it so you understand exactly what's required of your project should we federalize it. And then there's a best practices workbook that I think is also useful. So with that, I'm going to just jump into the application itself, and then we are gonna, I'll wrap up this webinar. So the actual application itself is linked directly on your funding opportunities webpage. If you're having any issues with opening this, there's some link issues. Open the link in a new tab, and it'll open, no problem there. So we did make some updates from the last project call. We tried to streamline a lot of the information in here, particularly in the readiness section. Instead of having to provide a narrative for your project schedule, for example, you just have to provide the schedule itself, and we will review that. You can select the fiscal year of implementation or letting, funding requirements, and so on and so forth. So your federal funding request will go here, required local match, local contribution if you're doing overmatch. And then if you're requesting TDCs, as I mentioned earlier, you can indicate that here, and then indicate the amount of TDCs you're requesting in that separate application, and just acknowledge you understand that TDCs are not guaranteed. So I'll go into more detail on this in the next webinar for each particular section, particularly the readiness assessment. I do want to kind of point out that the online application itself, you can save and resume it at any time. So at the very bottom of that form, there's a save function. You'll receive a link that is custom for your application, so you can save and resume it throughout this project call before submitting it. So you can just work on it as you go and complete it and just submit it whenever you are ready. Again, I talked about the updates. We tried to streamline it and make it a little easier, focusing more on the attachments than the actual narrative in the readiness section in particular. You can attach as many files as you want. So large files are permissible. There's a pretty large limit on individual files that will be pretty hard to meet. But if the file happens to be too large, just break it up into smaller files. There is no limit onto the number of attachments in each section. So you can do as many attachments as you want. As a best practice, always point out that it's probably best to always back up your document and your information. Just keep a separate copy of the application materials as you go through the process. I mean, the save and resume function is solid, but I think it's always best just to have a separate copy just as a backup in case there are any technical issues on anybody's end. I don't expect any, but I think that's always just a good opportunity there. So, and again, if you have any trouble opening the application, just right click and open in a new tab or window. So next steps, we'll do a project readiness deep dive next week on October 28th. So please register at the webpage where you registered for this webinar. And then if you have any questions, send it to funding@campotexas.org. We will be posting this webinar presentation and recording online. And then that's it. So I'll take any final questions, but that is the end of the presentation. Charmaine?
Hi, Ryan. So I have a question regarding the NOFO for the TASA and the STBG. It noted that eligible activities, the human resource and trainings are on there, but I didn't see it on the slide. Is that still applicable project to apply under those programs?
Yes. I probably skipped through it. I didn't want to go in depth into this entire list, but it is on there. Let me see. Right here on the second line.
Oh yeah, sorry. So could you give us a little more information about what qualifies for that? Because
That's a good question. We've never awarded that before, and I'll find some examples. I know there's some training programs for like construction that I believe TxDOT has done, and maybe the Tennessee DOT. A lot of DOTs will have training programs for their inspection staff and people who do bridge inspections. I'm thinking of an example from TDOT. So they have a bridge inspection team, and so you can pay for training employees to do that through that program. So it's really, just any in-house staff or anybody that needs to get trained for a particular activity, bridge inspections in this particular example. And I can find some more examples on that. I think there's actually a dedicated web page on FHWA's website particular for that. So if there's something in particular that you're interested in funding, let me know. I can always, chase that down with our FHWA partners. And kind of expanding on that, if you have any questions about specifics or your particular project scope, send that to me at the funding email address, because what I can do is I can turn around, and if I don't have an answer, immediately available to me, I can reach out to FHWA and get a response from them and get that back to you before you move forward with an application. So I would actually encourage that. If you have any questions, just go ahead and send your scope over. So.
Okay. So I have one more quick question.
Yeah.
Are board resolutions required for this application?
Yes, for the funding requirements, typically, it depends on what the resolution is for, and I'll talk about that in the readiness section, but in particular, the funding requirements section, you'll need a board resolution demonstrating that the match is available. So for the funding requirements, typically, yes.
Okay.
It just depends, and also for the, like any interlocal agreements, anything that requires the governing body to have a decision on, then we'll be looking for that resolution. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. See, Sean, let me hold on your mic. Sean, you have a question?
Yeah, it looks like most of the project or the presentation is geared towards projects that go through design and end with construction.
Mhm.
So are you recommending if we have a project that hasn't started yet, that we apply for design and guess on the construction cost? Or can we apply for just design and then come back at a later date or a later call and ask for construction funding?
That second one. So that's actually a really good, and I'll talk a lot about that in the readiness webinar, but going back to, the project development process is basically, wherever the project is now, you request the next phase because you can't go beyond, because each phase, the outcomes of each phase inform the next one. So like if you haven't done engineering design, you have no idea what that construction cost is gonna be. And so you just request the engineering design. And again, like in the example you just provided, you would come back at a later date and ask for the construction funding. So you're really kind of limited to where your product is in the next available phase. And I'll talk a lot more in depth about that in the next webinar, but that's a really, really good point. Just see, wherever your product is, if you completed the planning process, the next step would be engineering and design and environmental clearance, but not construction. So. And if you're requesting construction, obviously the assumption is that you've done your engineering design. Environmental clearance is one of those things. Obviously, you're not going to go through NEPA if you don't have federal funding on a project, but through the planning process and engineering design process, you likely have all of the pieces of environmental clearance ready to be distilled into the NEPA process. But I'm getting into readiness really in depth, but that's a really good question though. So I'll prepare your submittal for the next available phase or next development phase of your project. Does that answer your question, Sean?
Yep, I did. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Thanks for the questions. I know I kind of rambled a little bit. I'm a little tired this morning, but if you have any questions, please let me know. But this is really just this overview is really just to orient you to the materials available and kind of the principles of the process. Again, we will do a very in-depth readiness presentation next week. That will probably take the entire hour and a half. But please let me know if you have any questions, and I hope you can join us for that one. But with that, if there are no more questions, I'll end the webinar. Thank you.